Hey, Legal Rebels, this is Tom Martin. I'm the founder of LawDroid, and this is my podcast, LawDroid Manifesto, where I interview legal innovators about how they do what they do.
In this episode, I interview Jordan Couch, partner at Palace Law, whose 7-year journey to revolutionize legal regulation has positioned Washington State as a pioneer in entity-based licensing that could transform how legal services are delivered and make justice more accessible to everyone.
Welcome to the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. I'm Tom Martin, your host. I'm thrilled today to have on Jordan Couch. I've known him for a few years now, and this is actually a great excuse to get to know him better and share him with you. I've been impressed by Jordan. He has always been very innovative in his thinking. He's a very bright, affable guy, and he's a pleasure to hang out with. But beyond just being fun to hang out with, very impressive with what he's done in his career. He is now a partner for 5 years now at Palace Law. Friend Patrick Palace, a wonderful workers' compensation law firm in Tacoma, Washington. He's had some experience, clerking in Maryland and I believe Washington State for judges. He's also worked at NASA, which we're going to love to get into that and get some background on that. But also he received the Apex Award from the Washington State Bar Association 5 years ago. And that's where he chairs the Young Lawyers Association, as well as I believe the small and solo section. So with all of that, Jordan, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's always nice to get any chance to talk to you, Tom.
Today, I want to get into definitely, your background and origin story and all of that. But to kind of tease like where we're going to go towards the end of it, there's been some regulatory change afoot in Washington State, hasn't there?
Yeah, so I want to say around 7 years ago, this started where North Carolina had a lawsuit that, was trying to deal with LegalZoom in that state, and Washington said we should look at that. Things take time. So 7 years later, we finally passed a pilot project to test entity regulation in Washington to allow legal entities to offer legal services. And I've been working on this project in various roles with various bar associations throughout the process of this 7 years, which has been a fascinating journey.
Wow. And how much has changed in those 7 years, right?
Including our proposal. I think I've seen 3 different full proposals that are completely different proposals that have gone through during that time before we finally settled on what's happening now.
And it's really fascinating because that approach is one that I personally, I think that's a great solution. There's been solutions in other states where they basically take the enforcement off of different, UPL regulations for select companies and kind of see what happens. There's been other approaches as well, but this one, I think, where you actually keep the regulation, but you take it to like a, entity level where it's a corporation that's licensed, and then you have obviously people within the corporation that are responsible for making sure that that is abided by. But it seems to me a much more scalable approach where you could have outside investments, still have compliance with ethics, and all around everyone is happy, I hope.
Yeah, I think Washington's proposal is really unique. We have the fortunate role of following others so we can kind of see what works in other places. And I will admit, I had a different proposal for how to handle this that is not as good as the one that the state ended up coming up with and putting together here. And I think what makes Washington's really unique is this focus on both access to justice and really being an open experiment. So it's not, the states that have said, oh, we're going to get rid of the rules on law firm ownership. This is saying, we don't have all the ideas out there. We're not going to say this is the rule change we're making. We're saying you tell us what your idea is. And if we believe in your idea and we can measure the impact of your idea, then we'll approve it as a test, which I think is such a unique idea because it's not just focused on one rule. And I'm reminded there was a healthcare policy economist who always talked about, America's health system is impossible to solve and people keep trying to solve it and they're going to fail. But it's really easy to make it 1% better. And if we do a lot of that, suddenly that becomes a big deal, right? And I think about Washington's proposal here the same way. No one is going to solve the access to justice problem, right? But there are a lot of things like pro bono work that can make it a little bit better, 1% better. And if we do a lot of those 1% things, and so this proposal isn't saying, here's our solution. This proposal is saying, you tell us your idea, and we've created a framework to test your idea and see if it works.
it's real, like it's reality. And you see a lot of this kind of conversation on LinkedIn and other places where we meet, where there's this kind of focus on the panacea, the focus on like the false, perfect solution. And then if it's imperfect, then it's a failed project when that's not how reality works. And that's not how a lot of business outside of legal works.
In the years working on this, I've had always frustrating sometimes conversations with people where they'll say, well, that's not going to work. That's not going to solve the problem for this reason. And I say, okay, great. What's your idea? And if you don't have one, then okay, at least just get out of the way, right? Like, I'm not saying my ideas are going to work. I have some ideas I want to test, but I also know that I don't have all the answers and I know that I might be wrong. But if we have a safe framework to test these things and are open to the possibilities that, it might work, I think that makes a big difference there, right? Because so often people do say like, oh, well, we need more pro bono work. We need to do this. We need to do that. And like, those are all good things, but we can't stand in the way of other people trying to solve the problem.
100%. Don't make perfect the enemy of the good.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned a little bit about access to justice, and I know that you have some, pro bono work in your background earlier on, as well as now, and your interest in access to justice. But I do want to get into the origin story because that's what I love to do. Were you first in Alaska and then Montana, or like where were you?
Kind of. So my dad was a fishing guide. My mom was a teacher. And so my mom told me the story recently when I had my own kid that apparently she accepted the job offer in Alaska while she was in labor with me and moved 6 weeks later to Alaska. And so they'd been living in Montana and then they moved to Alaska and we were there a little bit between Montana and Alaska, but mostly Alaska for 8 years. And then we moved to Montana full time out. I like to joke I lived outside of a town of 8 people, but it was usually 7 while I was there because AJ spent a lot of time in jail. And true.
Wait a second. So like your mom got a job offer phone call while she was in labor?
Yes.
Wow.
And said yes, apparently.
Your mom is very driven.
Yeah. In another state, nonetheless. Just a wild thing to do. But yeah, it worked.
And you mentioned that your father is a fisher.
Yeah, he was a hunting and fishing guide.
And so I imagine when you grew up, you got exposed to a lot of that and went into the wilderness. And what was that kind of experience like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. In Sitka, we had a forest behind our house that we'd explore in a lot until the spring and the bears were coming out of hibernation and we were not allowed anymore. In Montana, we had, the lodge property and, small property in Montana of 200 acres leading up to the river.
That's all.
And so, the true story of this is that I made the mistake of telling my parents I was bored once and got locked out of the house because they said you have, 4 dogs, a four-wheeler, fishing rods. Come back when you're not bored. And I learned to say, I don't know what to do. Never say I'm bored again.
How old were you when that happened?
Probably about like 12, 13.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So in like your interest, obviously now in pursuing the law and also like the tech edge to it, how did they influence you in that respect? How did you end up in law school? Like there's two people that I talked to. One is like early on, hey, like I love to argue, like there was some kind of draw naturally to it. And others are like, I had a degree in English, so I had to earn money somehow. How did your influences come about?
I was more of the young side of it, and it was a little silly, but kid brains make associations in weird ways. And I think, in middle school, and I saw a photo of my dad in an old scrapbook from high school debate and started asking about that. And I associated that with being a lawyer, even though my dad didn't graduate college and was a fishing guide, right? But I associated that and decided I wanted to be a lawyer. Just that connection to my dad in a weird way, I guess. I don't know how that worked in my little brain, but it stuck. And I did debate in high school and I really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed that kind of arguing, the thoughtful, the research behind it. And I would talk to a lot of lawyers and I'd say, what's the reasons I should not be a lawyer, right? Whenever I'd meet people who happen to be lawyers. And they'd always say, oh, it's nothing like you see on TV. It's a lot of research. It's a lot of reading, a lot of writing. And I was like, these are 3 things that I love. So your negatives are kind of working for me. And then I just kind of fell into it. I was good at English. My mom was an English teacher for 40 years. So that was definitely drilled into me, the writing, the reading. Math and science were fun subjects for me. And I kind of liked that law also gives you an opportunity to study a little bit of everything, right? My current practice is workers' compensation. I deal with medical stuff a lot, right? Cross-examining doctors about medical issues requires a lot of scientific knowledge and understanding. And so I like the balance I get of getting to learn a little bit about everything.
Yeah, I agree with you that's one of the upsides of practicing law is that you get to I mean, not become an expert, but at the same time, like get up to speed on different subjects where you can have that one-to-one with someone who is an expert.
Yeah, they talk about being, an inch deep and a mile wide. I feel like lawyers are like, you know, a yard deep and an inch wide on a lot of things, right? Like I might know more about this doctor, about this medical situation exactly. I don't know more about medicine than any doctor ever. But on my case, on my specific medicine, I might know more than that doctor by the time I'm cross-examining them, right? And it's just, yeah, you're a yard deep and an inch wide.
You went to college at St. John's, right?
Yeah, small liberal arts school in Annapolis, Maryland. Funnily enough, I was between the Naval Academy and St. John's, very opposite schools that happen to be neighbors of each other. But I really like kind of the liberal arts program they had there, and I like the opportunity to study everything because I talked to lawyers about what should I do in undergrad, thinking like, oh, pre-law is important, and they would all say just study whatever you want. Law doesn't require anything for undergrad. You're going to encounter a lot of things, so study everything. And St. John's gave me the opportunity to study everything, right? Their curriculum is the history of Western thought and mathematics and music and science and literature. And it's just, yeah, it was everything.
Wow, that's pretty amazing and kind of scary and overwhelming at the same time for me. But the thing that stands out is you're saying like lawyers were saying, hey, you can get a degree. So already at that point, like the beginning of college, you were already in conversation with people that were lawyers. How did that come up?
Small town in high school, and my dad is a fishing guide as well. The clients, many of those, many of the clients who would come out are lawyers, right? Funnily enough, even some, I would later encounter here in Seattle had been fishing with my dad, and I would get to know them in like a different context suddenly. And so it was clients at the lodge. It was being in a small town. There were maybe four lawyers. We all kind of knew who they were. And when I was doing high school debate, they would of course do their volunteer time at the high school because there's nowhere else to volunteer and do pro bono work in that small town. And so I got kind of fortunate and had those opportunities to meet people through that.
Actually, that strikes a chord with me because, my dad, he wasn't a lawyer, he was a barber. One of his clients, though, was Vincent Bugliosi. And so hearing stories about him and like meeting him and stuff like that, had an influence on like kind of like opening up that door that it's a possibility. And I can see how that happened for you.
Even in he's on my mind right now because he just recently passed, but in the, legal luminaries and access to justice, Bill Newcomb used to fish with my dad years ago. It's kind of funny how that happens. And yeah, barbers, my barber says the same thing. She has a lot of lawyers who are her clients because she's downtown in Tacoma.
Yeah, and there's not much else to do but talk to your barber or your guide, right?
You're
Because
sitting in a boat all day, you're going to have a conversation.
yeah, get to know each other pretty well. At St. John's, what do they have a major or is it overall like the liberal arts?
Yeah, they translated into a major, and if I'm remembering correctly, it's a unique school, right? Like I don't know what my grades were from there ever. They translated, I think you double major in like philosophy and the history of math and science, but it really is everyone takes the same basic classes. Everyone studies the same thing. It's kind of like being in a liberal arts program within a larger school, right? My graduating class was 125, and it was the largest they'd had in 300 years, right? So it's you're kind of in a small school within the bigger college, basically, except there is no bigger college. And so, yeah, we all took the same courses, everything together.
Sounds really awesome. And I've seen pictures of it from, getting prepped to talk with you. And it just has this very idyllic, beautiful campus feel to it.
Yeah, fun facts. The third oldest college in America behind Harvard and William and Mary, in Annapolis. It's beautiful. And, one thing that's really fun about that kind of aspect of us all, taking the same courses is, when you're a freshman and you're talking to a sophomore, a junior, or a senior, they know what you're reading and they're excited to talk to you about it as well because they haven't gotten to talk about it since their freshman year, right? And so it kind of builds a nice community there around everyone's doing the same thing, everyone's working together. And actually had a friend in Maryland who, going into law school, he was an attorney, and he was talking to me and he said something that reminded me of St. John's and made me excited about law school. He said, Jordan, people complain about law school being so difficult, so hard, so miserable all the time. And he said, but remember, this is the last time you're going to be together with a group of people all working together towards the same goal. That can be really fun and exciting. And I was like, I kind of left that and looking forward to law school saying, yeah, this is going to be like St. John's again. Like we're all working together for the same goal.
So where did you end up going and what was that experience like? Was it that kind of team feel that you had hoped for?
Yeah. I went to Indiana University in Bloomington, and I did hear, horror stories from other friends in other schools, but Bloomington's IU was a really good school for having a community around it, right? The kid who graduated top of the class would share his notes from every class with everyone because he wasn't trying to screw people over. He was just a kind and very, very, very smart person, right? And so we had a lot of that community aspect and worked together on things still in college. And I did get that sense of us all rowing together, working towards the same things.
It's funny because it just brings up a theme. It sounds bad saying it that way, but like a theme for you, Jordan, which is like I think you're great with teams. Like you're a great team player from everything I've seen at Palace Law, and then your work with the Bar Association. Like I think you excel at that.
I think it's more fun working with people when you're doing something. It's also easier. Your work is best when you have other people to bounce ideas off of. And I think that's just kind of always been how I am of I like working with people when I'm doing something.
Do you have a big family? Do like lots of brothers and sisters, or
No, just one brother, and then my parents. And my parents were from Indiana, actually. It was kind of, I was avoiding it because they were from Northern Indiana when I went to law school. But then I found out Bloomington's campus, again, gorgeous. The law school was a good school. And I ended up in Indiana. My parents jokingly fled when they were kids still to Montana to get out. But I think one thing I learned from that is, family were friends, right? I didn't have a big family, but we had a lot of people that, we were close to in our community.
that's something about moving from place to place, kind of an ability to meet new people, make new friends, and deepen relationships.
Moving from California to Canada.
Yeah, that was a big one 13 years ago. But we're talking about you. So after law school, you go out there. Some people, they may have the motivation to like, okay, I'm going to land the biggest money job I could get, or like they're motivated by wanting to help people and do something that's impactful. And, you were working at I think the governor's office initially. What was it like making that transition from law school to the working world?
Yeah, so the governor's office in Maryland was still in college.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but it was unique. In law school, I think one of the flaws that still exists in law schools is a lot of them are really good at like placing top students into big law firms. And
Hmm.
there's not a lot of concept of the fact that the majority of legal work is not there. I was a fine student, but I think when I was applying for the big firm jobs, they could always kind of smell that I didn't really want it because I was copying and pasting my cover letter and changing the name of the firm and saying the same things. And I think my heart was never in it. It was that like, okay, this is what I'm told I should do. This is how I like pay back student loans. But it was never the kind of thing I was that interested in, right? Like I like working with people. I like serving individual clients. I like being able to talk to the person instead of having to talk to the board and go through the chain of command and all these things. It just doesn't work as well for me. And I also like the independence to be able to make decisions and do good work that you don't necessarily have in a bigger firm. Applied for a lot of those jobs after moving to Seattle, didn't get any interviews, and then kind of was just trying to figure out like what do I actually want to do, and started doing volunteer work in Seattle. And that's how I made the connections that got me into the working world, was just taking a step away from what am I supposed to be doing to what do I actually get enjoyment out of, and what makes me happy, and how do I get those things done. And that's how I kind of stumbled my way into the jobs I had.
I know that story, but I want to bring it out for everyone. But right before we do, I can't help but get in the NASA thing. Like you worked there like as a legal intern, so like a legal focus. But what was that like?
I have to give credit to a professor I had in Bloomington, Bill Henderson, had taught our ethics class, and he gave us all an assignment that was talk to 5 attorneys about their practice and write, an essay about the legal profession. What have you learned? Basically, a very simple project, but he told us all like, this is your opportunity to reach out to these people and talk to them. And I thought, it'd be really like, I love space, I love science. It'd be cool to work for NASA. They have a legal department, right? So I called the general counsel's office at NASA in DC, didn't get a response. So I called again, didn't get a response. Then I called a different number at the general counsel's office in NASA and got a response, and spoke to the chief counsel at the time. I don't know how that happened. And she heard I was doing this law school assignment, and because I was doing a law school assignment was helpful. And she said, let me see who can talk to you. And she found one of her counsels in the office to talk to me, and he did. And he spent probably half an hour, maybe an hour on the phone with me, just talking to me about his career, about what he's learned. And at the end of it, I said, so, here's what you did in your career to end up here. If I wanted to end up where you are, what should I do? And his immediate response was, send me your resume. There's this internship at Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland. Let me see what I can do. I think like a month later, he reached out to me without me reaching out to him, and he said, "Hey, have you talked to them at Goddard yet?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Hold on." 5 minutes later, I get a phone call setting up my interview.
Wow.
He didn't know me until I'd made this connection for a law school assignment. And I did a couple of rounds of interviews, ended up getting the job. And it was such a fun and kind of unique and weird legal experience, right? Because you're in-house counsel for a government agency. So a lot of the work is like, oh, this employee got fired and they're saying it's because they, were too old. It's age discrimination. Or this person got hurt at work. We need to follow up on the workers' compensation claim. This contract work, there's a dispute between two contractors who think their bid should have been chosen. We're in the middle of this fight based on who we chose. And then the next day it's, hey, what happens if we accidentally drop a 9 million cubic foot balloon in international waters? Or can you do a research report on how we can handle Google's moon mission that's private enterprise, but we want to make sure they don't mess up the landmark that is the Apollo 11 landing site. It was cool because it was that just bizarre. Like this kind of a lot of the stuff is rote and mundane and just, your basic legal work. But then occasionally the question underlying it has me reading international treaties and trying to figure out how any of this works. It was a fun time. And it was also very humbling because I got to meet a couple astronauts. To get to my office, I had to walk past the Nobel Prize that the guy won for proving the Big Bang Theory. He's just like in the lobby there. So it's a nice reminder every morning. Like, right. The humility of having to, lawyers are so often used to being the smartest guy in the room. And I remember one of the astronauts I met that summer was Tom Marshburn. And I will never forget just like how humbling that experience was. Because he was talking to us and he was explaining how, he got his medical degree and became a surgeon, but that wasn't enough to be an astronaut. So then he went back and got his PhD in physics as well. So he had 2 doctorates and was a surgeon. And he'd been up on the ISS with Canadian Chris Hadfield. And someone asked him the question, so did you ever, play guitar up there? Well, you're up there since Chris had the guitar. And he goes, that's my guitar. I'm a classically trained guitarist. So like add that to his list of resume skills, right? And then finally someone asked him, so are you a pilot? And he goes, no, I'm not a pilot. Like I can fly planes and I have my pilot's license and I can fly commercial planes, but I'm not like a pilot because in his mind, the concept of pilot was people who flew test planes for the military. Just the humility of like this man to be like, yeah, I'm not a pilot. I can only fly commercial planes, right? Like it was great.
Yeah. Well, intelligence is as intelligence does.
Yeah.
One thing that it highlights for me, though, that I think is a common theme and a perfect segue to the next thing I want to talk to you about is moxie, and like not accepting the boundaries or borders that kind of appear and that we have as a working assumption and kind of like erasing them, going like, well, why not just call in, hey,
Yeah.
I'm interested. So the segue there is naturally to how things came about with Palace Law. Like, well, without me going into it, like if you could share the story about it, how that came about.
My mentor at NASA, who I was working under, had given me the advice of, in my legal career, basically be a leaf on the wind, right? If you set your sights too hard and aren't open to what's happening around you, you might miss something, is what he said. So I moved out to Seattle, was, applying for big firm jobs that I didn't really want, but were what I was supposed to do. And I finally kind of just gave up and said, okay, what do I care about? What do I want to do? And I got involved with the local bar association, just started going to events, trying to learn, got involved in the legal technology and innovation space because that was something that I'd learned a little bit about in law school and thought was interesting. I come from a working class family who did not have a lot of interactions with lawyers except as people paying us for services, right? And so this idea of access to justice mattered a lot to me, and this idea of technology and, science was interesting to me, and bringing that mindset to the law. And so I started just kind of exploring around, and through just random connections I made as I was doing these things, I found myself doing contract work in a workers' compensation firm where it was nice because, again, I'm helping, people who've been hurt at work, right? Like that's the dream of helping people on their worst day solve problems, get better. And so I was doing that work. And meanwhile, I'm kind of meeting with attorneys in Seattle, and I keep hearing this refrain. Oh yeah, you have a lot of similar interests to our former bar president, Patrick something. I can't remember his last name. And I keep thinking like, oh, I'm going to look this up. Like they've got it. There's got to be a record of that. I can figure out who he is. I can reach out to him. And didn't get around to it because I was looking for a job and I was busy. And finally, I was at this event, this legal technology and innovation event that friends of ours, mutual friends of ours, had put on in Seattle. And I showed up because I'd heard about it on Twitter, and I thought this seems interesting. And it was a free event. And I get there, and one of the speakers is introducing people there in the audience, and they say, "Yeah, we're so excited to have our former bar president Patrick Pallas here," and they point to the guy sitting right in front of me. And I was sitting there, and I was like, "Well, that's really convenient." As soon as the event was over, I stood up and I tapped him on the shoulder and I said, "Hey, Patrick, my name is Jordan, and apparently I really need to meet you." And I explained a little bit. I keep hearing we have similar interests. And he said, "Oh, that's great." And I said, "Yeah, so I'd love to grab coffee and just hear about what you're doing sometime." And he said, "That's great. I got to tell you though, I'm not looking to hire any attorneys right now." And I was like, "That's fine. I've got work I'm doing. That's okay." I didn't know Patrick was a workers' comp attorney at the time, and I was doing workers' compensation even, right? I just said we had similar interests in access to justice.
Yeah.
And he said, "That's great." And he said, "I got to tell you though, really especially new lawyers. I'm not hiring any new lawyers. I'm not looking to hire anyone generally, especially not new lawyers." And I said, "That's totally fine. But yeah, I'd love to get your card, reach out, get coffee." Get his card, find out, yeah, he's doing workers' compensation, which I thought that's interesting, right? And I emailed him about a week later and I said, "When can we grab coffee?" And his response to me was like, "Send your resume to my assistant." And I was like, what kind of asshole is making me send a resume to get coffee with them?
Right.
If he wants to talk to me about
Yeah.
work, he can talk to me about it over coffee. We don't need.
Right.
And so I send it, and she says, "When can you come in for an interview?" And I was like, "Wait, I don't know what changed here. What happened?
Right.
Is this the right person?" And she goes, "Yeah, he wants to set up an interview with you." And I said, "Okay. Guess that's what's happening." 2 interviews later, I get a call and they say, "Yeah, it's between you and one other person." I'm like, "Wait, first this job doesn't exist. Now I'm competing against someone for this job that doesn't exist. What is going on here?" He later tells me the story is he wasn't looking to hire people, but he was interested in what I was doing and that I had shared interest and decided he should interview some other people before hiring me. That's his side of the story on this, apparently. Yeah. He offered me a job. And I actually went to the firm I was doing contract work for and said, "Hey, I've got this job offer at another workers' compensation firm. You guys gave me my first chance here. You guys taught me. I don't want to be abandoning you guys. If you guys want to offer me a full-time job, I would take that over this one." Because I believed in that kind of loyalty to people. And they said, "Yeah, we're not looking to hire someone on full-time." And I said, "Okay." I went to Patrick. About a year later, I ran into him giving hell to one of the other partners of that firm for not hiring me. So that was when I was like, okay, I'm home. I'm in the right spots.
That's a wonderful story of following your instincts and motivation and having the courage to reach out, and it worked out really, really well.
Yeah, almost 10 years later now, and I'm still there.
Yeah,
I'm not going anywhere. Now I'm a partner in the firm for almost 6 years. Yeah.
and also it's very thoughtful of you with the place you were doing contract work at to talk to them about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I still like that firm. I still interact with them because we are on the same side on a lot of these cases. I didn't want to burn bridges there for sure.
So with that, let's dive into the stuff that's going on right now a little bit. I mean, the first thing, just to kind of serve this up at the top, the changes that have been afoot with generative AI, this new version, this new species of AI, although AI has been around for over 50 years, it's having a huge impact. It doesn't feel like the same as other small tweaks or technologies that have come about, going to the cloud. That was cool, made things more accessible, but it wasn't revolutionary. And I know that gets bandied about a lot, but do you feel similar to do you think that this it's different this time or not?
I think yes and no. I think the biggest comparison we can draw is to maybe not the cloud, but the internet generally. The internet happened slower, right? There are still attorneys I know right now in firms that are good attorneys who are currently transitioning to the cloud. But I think about, when an attorney I knew in Indiana said when he was in law school or I was in law school, they could take their lunch break and walk into any firm and get, paid by the hour to do some legal research to pay for their lunch, right? Because there was so many physical books. Every law firm had a library that they had to have. And so that transition, if we think about what the internet has done in 30 years, that's probably comparable. The difference is it's probably going to happen knowing lawyers, it's probably going to happen in 10 years this time. That transition, right? I think about the billable hour right now. If you were billing your clients for the time it takes you to look up things and do the physical research in physical books, you'd probably be committing an ethics violation for unreasonable billing, right? But today, if you're not using AI for your legal research, you're not committing an ethical violation for billing too much. But I think in the next 5 years, we're going to see that opinion come down in some state where they say, yeah, this lawyer billed too much because they could have had AI help them with their research in half the time.
And how's this filtering down to your day to day and like what you do?
Couple areas, right? Legal research has been seriously changed for me. I'll plug Vincent AI from Fastcase because I've been using, or VLEX Fastcase, now Clio, because I've been using
Right.
them since the beginning, and I'm continuing to be really impressed with that tool. I had a case, recently where something came up in a deposition that made me realize I needed to file a motion the next morning and draft a complaint for a separate case that same or related to that at the same time. And that's the kind of thing that in the past would have meant I spend zero time with my daughter that night. And like I have an 18-month-old daughter, so I measure time these days and like how much do I get to have with her versus doing legal work? And that became instead using a combination of Copilot and Vincent AI, an hour-long project.
Wow, that's amazing.
So that's a big impact on like legal research side. On the kind of day to day, other than that, I think a lot of it comes to me for ideation, right? With my role, I'm not always doing managing the easy cases. I'm doing a lot more of the bigger project stuff, and so I use it as my kind of my not assistant, my like idea generator oftentimes, and I'll say, hey, here's this thing I'm writing. Give me some draft ideas of things I've missed, right? Help me develop this into a better idea. Or, drafting a direct examination of a witness, right? Okay, here's the doctor's medical report. I need to do a direct examination. What are some things in this report that I should highlight that help my case? Here's my argument. What should help me? And so it's a lot of bouncing off ideas and sometimes giving me first drafts, sometimes giving me the final edits, depending on what I'm doing. So that's my day-to-day use of AI right now.
Yeah, so the latter one was kind of like an intelligent sounding board.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cool. You mentioned at the top that it was about 7 years ago that there was originally a proposal about how to change things up in Washington State about regulation. Like, how did that come about?
In Washington State, our structure around the bar is kind of, I think, unique. So we have our Washington State Bar Association that regulates lawyers. We're a unified bar, meaning the regulatory and the trade association are together. We also have separate entities, though, that the Washington State Supreme Court has created, similar to the state bar, but that are separate from the state bar, but also the Supreme Court didn't really create like separate staff, so they kind of work with the state bar a lot. And we just had a whole long, like year-long process of figuring out what that relationship is supposed to be like. But the two main ones that I have interacted with are the Access to Justice Board, which is focused on access to justice, and the Practice of Law Board, which is focused on the practice of law. The Practice of Law Board is the one that, complaints of unauthorized practice of law go to. They deal with that. They also, though, are tasked with, coming up with innovations around the practice of law. And I think it was about 7 years ago I want to say there was this settlement with LegalZoom in North Carolina around them practicing, offering legal services. And the Supreme Court in Washington tasked the Practice of Law Board with saying, okay, how can we rewrite our definition of the practice of law to handle this situation? And at that time, the Practice of Law Board came up with basically this amendment to what's known as GR 24, General Rule 24, where the practice of law is defined, that created an exception to that definition of the practice of law that had all these caveats, and it basically kind of followed the settlement with North Carolina and LegalZoom, kind of modeling after that. And that was going through the process of approval. And I was on the Access to Justice Board's tech committee. I was chairing it at the time. And we looked at this and we said, okay, here's the problem. Like you're outdated already, right? This is from a settlement a couple of years ago. Technology is changing. Also, personally, whenever you're writing a rule, if the exceptions are longer than the rule, then maybe the rule needs to change. To this day, there's an exception in General Rule 24 where it's not considered the practice of law for clerks at law libraries to hand people pre-approved packets that they request of like documents to fillable forms. And it was like,
Okay.
look, if your definition of the practice of law includes handing someone a court-approved packet of already printed forms that they ask for, you need to change the definition of the practice of law. Like that exception shouldn't be there. That means your law is written poorly. But so this proposal was going through and we kind of pushed back and said, and a couple other groups got together like in the legal innovation space. This was when AVO was in Seattle and pushed back on it as well and said, like, look, you're behind the times. This isn't the way to go. And so that proposal was scrapped, go on the practice of law board for having the courage to say, okay, we put a lot of work into this, but this isn't right. We're going to try again. And we convened some work groups around changing the definition of it and coming up with new definitions. I had a new proposal that I really liked that obviously is not what we ended up doing. Like I said, the current idea is better than my idea. But we bandied about that for a while. And then after Arizona and Utah put together their proposals and Utah started the sandbox, our Supreme Court went back to the practice of law board and said, hey, how about you look at doing something like this instead? As they were kind of still bandying about this idea. And that's how the new project that got formed actually started.
Is this new regulation, is it in place now?
It is approved by the Supreme Court. They are working on setting up, approved by the Supreme Court. It is technically in place. However, you can't apply yet because once the court approves it, they have to do the work of actually putting together what that looks like and all the kind of dotting I's and crossing T's. And so they're in that process right now. We just, at the last meeting of the Board of Governors, approved the license fee and the application fee for entities. My last memory is that their target is October. They're going to be accepting applications for entities into this program.
Obviously, the concept and the regulations came first, and then now kind of like the administrative behind it to support people actually applying and all that. Have you taken an interest in perhaps like pursuing something that would be kind of pushing the frontier as to practicing law, but with technology?
Yeah, I've been very open about this from the beginning 7 years ago that I intend to participate in this, and I think every other lawyer should. And I've even spoken at CLEs and written articles on how other lawyers can do this and offered up my services to say, hey, let's do this because access to justice is a real crisis. We need to help people, and the more people involved, the better in this program. And, I was chair. I think I'm still technically past chair until October of the solo and small practice section for the state bar. And, the people who are struggling the most as lawyers are solo and small firm practitioners who are serving consumers. And the good news is the people we've been seeing benefit most from the entity regulation has been solo and small firm practitioners trying to do something differently. Because for a very long time, the solo and small firms have been following a model that was designed for big firms to be profitable off the backs of all their associates, right? And their corporate clients. That business model just doesn't work for serving consumers. And, I've got a whole economics lesson I do on this at CLEs, but you can actually see in the numbers how the cost of legal services is going up. And yet at the same time, solo and small firm attorneys are working harder to find clients and making less money. That's a problem, right? And it's the economics term is Baumol's cost disease here, right? Where we can't build more hours into the time. So unless we find efficiencies, our costs go up and our demand goes down. And we see fewer people accessing these services. And so we suffer even more because now we're getting fewer clients when we're already making less money. Like it's just a bad thing so yes, I intend to participate in this. I want to see how AI can really help deliver legal services in a better way to people, to consumers who might not want to hire an attorney for a variety of reasons that might be, but seeing if we can offer them something, because just because you don't want an attorney or just because you don't have a case that's good enough that an attorney will take it doesn't mean you couldn't use some help or don't want some help, right? The analogy I always give is, lawyers are selling Lamborghinis and we're banning the sale of Honda Civics and bicycles.
Absolutely. And that economic analysis perspective that you brought to it is fascinating. What's the name of that guy again?
William Baumol, Baumol. If you do show notes, I can send you a great article I wrote for Legal Evolution on this and actually highlighted some solo and small firm practitioners who are finding ways to kind of get around that and find efficiencies and serve more people for cheaper.
It seems like whenever we have this kind of discussion together amongst other lawyers, like a big thing that comes up quite often is just thinking of this access to justice thing as something separate, something different, something like that is kind of walled off from what we regularly do as lawyers. Like this is the practice of law over here, and then this access to justice thing. Why do you think lawyers separate it? Because in my mind, both of these things are basically, this is how we provide legal services in a modern consumer-oriented way that has proven itself with like Amazon coming in and selling books versus the old-fashioned way of selling books in a bookstore. Like, it just seems to me like a natural integrated spectrum. And why do you think lawyers like parse it out the way that they do?
I think one is just genuine fear. And it's something you see often in economic hardships anywhere in the globe where people's, when they're struggling, their focus can often be diverted to the wrong area. And so right now, if you tell solo and small firm practitioners you want to, help competitors to them, they're going to be upset about that, right? Because they see this as competition, not as opportunity. And they're already struggling. The problem is, we need to educate those solo and small firm practitioners that the reason you're struggling is not because LegalZoom is taking away your clients. Those people were never going to hire you. The reason you're struggling is because you're in a business model that's designed for a different type of world and a different, customer. And for you to do better requires not banning LegalZoom. It requires helping you adapt to offer legal services in a different way. A good example of this was Forrest Carlson is an attorney in Washington who did wills and trusts. And when he saw LegalZoom coming, he built his own website that did it for free. Because he said, okay, LegalZoom's undercutting me. I can undercut LegalZoom. But now when people are going through his free wills site and they run into problems, what do? Well, they click on the button that says, I want help from a lawyer, and he helps them. Right? He was driving clients to him and offloading a lot of the easy work that he didn't need to be doing so he could focus on higher level things. And so I think, fear is a big part of it, right? That lawyers are just afraid when they're already struggling that more of their, resources, more of their clients are going to be taken away from them. The other side of it, though, I think is too many lawyers don't see the access to justice problem because they are struggling to find clients and they're helping everyone that they think, can use their help, right? I've had too many conversations with plaintiffs' attorneys who have said to me the actual words, there's no access to justice problem in the plaintiff's work because of the contingency fee. And it frustrated me so many times when I would hear this to an extent because at the same time, 9 out of 10 people studies will show who have a valid injury claim will never, follow through with getting what they're entitled to. So no, we do have an access to justice crisis. 9 out of 10 people are not following through. But what I understood, I finally kind of found my understanding with these other people. What they're saying is everyone can afford my services. So anyone who wants to hire me and has a case that is worth money can afford me, right? They're defining access to justice wrong. They're defining it as people with good cases being able to afford an attorney, instead of it being people having accesses to the legal help they want. And that distinction is really important because oftentimes people don't want an attorney, right? There's some good access to justice studies that say that if a case isn't contentious, people would rather not get an attorney involved oftentimes because they don't want to make it contentious. They want it to go by smoothly. But that doesn't mean they don't want information. They're using Google. They're using ChatGPT right now to get information. But that doesn't mean they want an attorney. And so I think attorneys too often see it as, well, I take every good case. Therefore, there's no access to justice problem because if a good case calls me, but they're missing that justice is not hiring a lawyer. Justice is access to legal information and resources that are tailored to what you actually need.
100%. And I got to admit that I've been guilty of it in the past, is that lawyers viewing themselves as a primary character in this story. Mm-hmm. And actually the primary character in this story is what is in most preambles to the rules of ethics in different states, is that this is actually about the people and their legal issues and helping them with their legal problems, not us.
Yeah, I've used the analogy oftentimes to the Black & Decker drill and told people no one wants to hire an attorney. You have been the last resort because something's not working. In the same way, the old Black & Decker story of they don't sell drills, they sell a hole in the wall. And more importantly, they sell a picture hanging on the wall, right? No one cares about the hole. No one cares about the drill. They want the picture up. You're giving them access to that in the smoothest way possible. Nobody wants an attorney or a judge or a courtroom. They want help with their problem that happens to be regulated by the legal system, right? Like by the laws of this country. That's what they want.
Well, this is a perfect time to go to the couple of questions that I love to ask my guests at the end. You obviously have a lot going on when it comes to the firm with all of the clients and cases you deal with, as well as like the interest in access to justice, not to mention like the technology aspect and working on that regulatory change and all that. How do you do it? Like, how do you keep it balanced? You had mentioned like the plus or minus the time with your daughter. Like, how does that work?
Being passionate is a big key. I can't remember her name right now, but the producer behind Crazy Rich Asians, Pirates of the Caribbean, the Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, had a saying that I really liked, which she said, if no one's passionate about something, even if all of us think it's a great idea, we don't do it. And as you're finding work-life balance, that comes pretty easily if you're passionate about what you're doing. If you're not, it's not going to get done. But if I'm passionate about what I'm doing, I'm going to find the time to spend time with my daughter, to go fishing, to do the access to justice work and work on my firm because I'm passionate about all those things. And so I don't necessarily have like a system or a strategy of like, here's how I block my time, here's how I function through these things. It's just, I only pick the projects that I'm passionate about. And because I'm passionate about them, I get them done. I find the way to make it work because it's occupying my mind whether I'm, physically working on it or not. It's there because I care about it, because I'm excited about it. And so if you find that passion, it'll happen.
Well said. And related to that is just in doing all this stuff and keeping so busy, but following your passion and actually getting results and an impact in the world. What is that? What makes it worthwhile for you?
I don't know where it necessarily comes from, but I have a drive to help. Maybe some part of it is like people have helped me along the way. Always part of what got me involved in bar associations when I started out as a lawyer was I'd been helped by people to get to that point, and it felt like the requirement and is to give back at that point in time. And so, and just generally, I got into lawyer because I wanted to help people through the legal system, and seeing that we're failing 85% of people says, okay, well, let's keep pushing for that, right? Like Palace Law, my law firm's mission is to ensure justice for the injured in every community. And we take that seriously. That is not to serve our clients. It is to ensure justice for the injured in every community. And that means we have to push it and try to find the ways we can strategically do that and help people. Yeah, it's hard to say. What drives me is helping people, and it's the right thing to do, and it's exciting. And it's the same thing that drove me into law in the first place. It's the same thing that drives me into, spending time with my daughters, wanting to help people and wanting to make the world a better place. I'm a huge Kurt Vonnegut fan, and he had a great line that I think he got from his son when asked, what's the meaning of life? He said, to help each other get through this thing, whatever it is. It rejects the question and says, the meaning of life doesn't matter. We have to help each other get through this thing, whatever that is. Whatever the meaning is, just help each other get through it right now. And I like that idea.
I love that, and I love the way that you've been helping your team and all of us get through it with you. I'm really excited to see what you do in the future and everything that you're working on, Jordan. It's been a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
You too, Tom. Thank you so much for setting this up and taking the time.
For everyone out there that wants to learn more about Jordan and keep in touch with you, how would they do that?
I am on all social media as Jordan L. Couch. And you can also email me at palacelaw.com. I'm always happy to talk about innovation, technology, or just how we can, help each other get through this thing, whatever it is.
Well, that sounds great. And for all of you out there, thank you so much for watching. See you next time.
Thank you so much for watching the latest episode of the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. To keep in the loop about upcoming episodes, please subscribe to LawDroid Manifesto and you'll get notified. Thanks for watching. See you next time.